enter into this debate today, and there is no question that people are struggling to pay for the rising cost of living, on groceries, on housing, on energy, you name it, they are struggling, while billionaires and big corporations are getting richer more than ever. Big oil companies and CEOs are getting wealthier off the backs of Canadians who are struggling with the rising cost of living and dealing with the devastating consequences of extreme weather caused by the climate crisis. In BC, my home province, we are still trying to recover from the devastating wildfire and floods. In 2021, there were 1,600 fires in British Columbia. Together, they burned down 8,700 square kilometers of land. The summer of 2021 saw the village of Lytton burn to the ground, a cost of estimated at $78 million. And not to mention the emotional trauma and the damage that this has done to the community, to the individuals who suffer this loss. Then came the floods in November 2021, where the communities of Merritt, Princeton, and Abbotsford in southern British Columbia were flooded with an estimated cost of $450 million in damages. And again, not to mention the emotional trauma that people are still struggling with. And of course, BC is not alone in this experience of extreme weather. This is happening across the globe. It's happening right here in Canada, from coast to coast to coast. Now, I won't go on and list all the examples. We all know it, and we spoke about it in this House. But what is clear is this, that urgent action is needed to address the climate crisis. Now, the Conservatives are choosing to close their eyes, turn a blind eye to this reality. And to be clear, carbon pricing is revenue neutral. So all revenues are returned to the province or territory in which they are generated. Households receive 90% of revenues raised from the fuel chargeback through a direct rebate. And these rebates are paid back quarterly in my own home province in British Columbia. There's also an additional supplement available to people who live in small and rural communities. Now, the PBO has estimated that 8 out of 10 households will receive more back in rebates than they pay in fuel charges. The Conservatives claim that 60% of households incur a net loss is based on the PBO estimates of the economic impact of the federal carbon pricing in 2030. That's 7 years from now, just to be clear and to put that on the record. And those estimates incorporate a projected loss in economic efficiency from carbon pricing, but do not attempt to account for the economic and environmental costs of the climate crisis. I just put on the record the cost of what it was for British Columbia when we experienced the floods and the wildfires. That's not been accounted for. Looking at the direct fiscal impact only, the same PBO report found that, and I quote, for the vast majority of households in the backstop provinces, their rebates exceed their carbon costs. The net benefits of the federal carbon pricing system are broadly progressive by income group. Households with the lowest incomes receive the largest net transfers, and only the wealthiest households pay more than they get back in rebates. But hey, why let the facts get in the way of the rhetoric? Why let the facts get in the way of the Conservatives' attempt to fundraise for their own political gain at the expense of the climate crisis? But instead of focusing on real solutions, they choose to engage in cheap politics. That much is clear. The Conservatives said no to the NDP's proposal to exempt the GST to home heating. That would have made a real difference in support of everyday Canadians who are struggling to pay for the energy cost. But no, they said no to that and rejected it. That is the truth. They refused to go after the biggest polluters. They refused to go after the ultra-rich. And when New Democrats call for a tax on the excess profits of huge corporations to make life more affordable, both the Conservatives and the Liberals voted no to making big oil companies pay what they owe to help families cope with the high cost of living. They refused to go after big oil, who's making record profits to the tune of $147 billion in profits last year. They have selected, the Conservatives, to give them a free pass instead. And under Canada's carbon pricing system, the biggest polluters pay the lowest carbon tax rate. Loopholes allow for oil and gas companies only pay a tiny portion of the cost for their pollution. And in fact, 80 to 90% of emissions are exempt. Suncor only pays 1/114th of the full carbon price. These loopholes need to be closed so that big oil pays what they owe for their pollution. And more than that, the UN Secretary General said, and I quote, "Polluters must pay," and call on countries to implement a windfall profit tax on fossil fuel companies. The Conservative government in the UK has already put a 25% windfall tax on oil and gas profits. The EU has announced plans for a tax on windfall profits. Spain, Greece, Italy, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria have all implemented a similar levy. Yet, both the Liberals and the Conservatives oppose making the big oil companies and the ultra-rich pay their fair share. The NDP takes a very different perspective. This corporate greed has to stop. Families are struggling, and one way to make them help them to tackle the high cost of living is to put in a windfall tax on excess profits for the ultra wealthy. Both the Liberals and Conservatives need to step up and support the people across this country. They have voted against the NDP's motion on excess profit tax for the ultra-rich to help struggling families. It makes no sense. And the federal carbon pricing system, by the way, only applies to provinces and territories that do not put a price on pollution or do not meet the federal standards. So across the country, Quebec, to my colleagues, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, Labrador, the Northwest Territories, British Columbia, and New Brunswick all have their own carbon pricing solutions that they have already put in place. So that means what the Conservatives are talking about with their rhetoric actually would not help those provinces and territories. The leader of the Conservatives claimed that he's there for the working people, and we've heard it today just in his speech. The working class. What do they want? They want the government, they want the Conservatives to support the fight against greedflation. They want that action. They want to see a windfall tax or excessive profiteering tax for the ultra-wealthy CEOs. They want real solutions and not just slogans. Divisive rhetoric and fear-mongering will not help the struggles that people face every day. And Mr. Speaker, I would be remiss if I don't point this out. The offensive comments that came from the leader of the Conservatives when he said and called my riding, and I quote, "hell on earth." It is despicable that he will use that language to describe any riding in this country. Of course our community is struggling, and we are struggling, but you know what, Mr. Speaker? We have people in our community who's working every single day, putting their lives on the line to support the people in the community. And for the leader of the Conservatives to call my riding hell on earth is despicable, and he needs to apologize.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires.